I have met some of the most famous stars in Hollywood, certainly. I've met one president. I've met a lot of famous people. I never get overawed. I'm never really that impressed by who I meet. Not that some of them aren't great people, not that some of them aren't actual heroes. Yesterday, I was overawed. Yesterday, I met a guy who actually overawed me. When I was learning to fly a plane, I like to learn to do different things. It helps me in my work, and it keeps my mind sharp and all this. And I got a pilot's license a few years back. And while I was getting my pilot's license, I got really involved in aviation and the history of aviation, and I would study these heroes. And there were heroes like the Wright brothers, these very quirky little brothers who beat out the government in inventing the airplane. There was Charles Lindbergh, who, as a politician, was not that great a guy, but as an aviator was a genuine innovator and hero. John Glenn was one of my favorites. But there was just nobody that really struck me like the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of African-American military pilots who fought in World War II, despite the bigotry that tried to prevent them, that surrounded them. And yesterday I got to meet Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, who was one of them. I have to tell you, I would never get nervous doing interviews with anybody. I was actually nervous and overawed. They tried to stop them from doing what they do. Eleanor Roosevelt famously went up and flew with one of them, and that really made a difference. Colonel Stewart has a new book out called Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's firsthand account of World War II. It's co-authored by Philip Handelman. It tells his experience flying over Europe while helping to defend freedom, even though he wasn't afforded that same freedom in his own country. If I ever had sat down and talked to a giant, it was yesterday. I think you'll really enjoy the interview. Take a look. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, it's an honor to meet you and an honor to have you here. I'm so glad you could come on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into flying in the first place?
Well, I guess it was a desire ever since I was a child. I was born in Newport News, Virginia, not too far from Langley Field. And my parents tell me that while in the crib, I used to watch these planes from Langley Field flying over and used to Google at them. And at 2, the family moved to New York and moved about a mile and a half from the airport there. It was named North Beach Airport at the time, but in 1939 it changed its name to LaGuardia Airport. But as a teenager, I used to go out and just watch the planes take off and fantasize about being up in the cockpit and flying the plane myself.
And so did you start flying before the war, before the military?
Never was in a plane before going into the Cadet Corps, and that was my first plane ride.
So now, how did you find out that did you find out first that there was going to be an Air Corps for black people, or did you just volunteer?
Well, I always felt as though I wanted to be a pilot, and I didn't really know about the restrictions at that time, that the prejudice involved there, that no blacks were flying in the airlines, nor would they accept any at the time. I'm talking about before the war. But as the war cloud started gathering in 1938, 39, and 40, a draft took place. And any able-bodied citizen, anywhere from 18 to 38, had to register for the draft and was subject to a lottery of recall as far as the going into the service was concerned. I knew I would probably be going in at 18 because of the draft there. And one way to beat going into the service and just being assigned anywhere is to choose a branch of the service and volunteer. So that's what I did. I volunteered, and when I went to volunteer, I found out that they did not, at the time, accept African Americans for training as aircrew members or pilots there. It was a little while after that in high school that I happened to read someplace that the Air Corps relented and decided that, yes, we will go ahead and accept African Americans for training as pilots and aircrew members, but it must be on a segregated basis. Well, what I did, I forgot about the word segregated basis. I just saw the one that, yes, we will accept them.
Yeah.
I sped right down to the recruiting center and volunteered. I took the test that they had at the time. They gave you a mental and physical test, right. And I was accepted. And then I was called to service in April of 1943.
Okay. And so you've never flown before?
Never had flown before.
And
And it was, quite an experience because I had fantasized about flying. I'd see the planes flying in the air and I'd imagine myself at the controls, and I imagined what the controls would be like. And as a kid, I used to have one of these, what we call pushos, but they're go-karts.
Okay.
And the pedals on the go-kart, you push the right pedal to go left, and you push the left pedal to go right, because it was a pivot in the front there. And the first time I got in the plane, and the instructor says, well, you've got the controls there. He says, try a left turn, and I pushed my right foot in on the rudder to make a left turn. So I had to get over that negative transfer. And of course, a view, the perspective from the cockpit was entirely new to me.
Yeah.
They had the section lines, as you're familiar with, and the different identification areas on the ground. So it was becoming used to that, but it came to it quite fast.
Now, when you actually got into the service, did you encounter prejudice within the service? There are stories about white commanders who came to the Tuskegee Airmen who were not sympathetic. Did you encounter that?
I did not encounter that. This is not to say it didn't occur, but when it occurred was prior to my going into the service there. Actually, the African Americans who were taking flight training, this occurred in early 1941, and I didn't go in until 1943. So a lot of that era of a transition and accommodation for the African Americans had already taken place to a certain extent. So your question, to answer it briefly, is that no, I did not run into a lot of the, in fact, I had a great deal of respect for the instructors that I had, who were all white at the time. I mean, they taught me to fly, and they taught me to fly well.
Right.
And except for maybe an incident or two or something like that, everything went quite smoothly.
And you went into combat? You did go into combat?
I did go into combat, and after the training, I went overseas to Italy, and I was assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group, and our job was to escort B-17s or B-24s, Liberators, to their targets in Central Europe there. And of course, the job being to protect those bombers from interception by foreign enemy aircraft. And it was our job to ward them off. And of course, we saw the responsibility there, because each one of those bombers, there were 10 crew members. There's the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and the gunners there. And any one of them that was shot down, you're going to potentially lose 10 men there. So it was a responsibility, and we recognized that responsibility, and we tried our best to.
I have to ask you this, because I've flown planes. One of the things that when you fly a plane, you start to think about flying a plane while being shot at. Flying a plane is hard. It's hard to fly a plane.
Of course.
When people start shooting at you. So the first time you got into a plane and you took off, were you overwhelmed, or did you think, no, I can do this?
I had the confidence in myself at the time. What had happened was, I guess I had about 7 hours in instruction in the PT-19, which was a 75 or 90 horsepower aircraft. But anyway, the instructor, I knew that it was coming, because he said, taxi over by the wind tee. And I taxied by the wind tee, and he was sitting in front there, and he started unbuckling, and I said, this is it, He stepped back on the wing there, got out and stepped back on the wing, and he says, well, go out, do what you've been doing with me all the time, and everything will be fine, and just come back to the tee here when you land. And I says, oh boy, this is it. So I remember breaking ground. I remember going down the grass strip there and pulling back on the stick and breaking ground, and then that was that feeling of exhilaration. I said, this is mine, I'm doing it, and this is it. So I came back around and landed, taxied up to the tee, and he says, take it around again. So he did this 3 times, and that was it.
That's great. That's great. So now you're flying a plane,
yes,
but you're in combat. how do you control a plane while under attack? I mean,
Well, you learn to do these things, and I guess what they call mental and physical coordination, or all of them come into play
yeah,
because of your training there. But I guess, the two things I remember in combat there was the first time I went on a mission, and the second time was when I got into a dogfight with a number of enemy planes, and I ran into a horde of FW-190s, which was a premium German fighter plane, and it was up in Austria. And we were on what was known as a fighter sweep at the time there, and there were 7 of us that had voluntarily separated from the rest of the squadron that we were flying with and the bomber formation. And this horde of German fighters attacked us. 3 of us were shot down. The first made it back to friendly territory, Yugoslavia, and landed there. The second pilot, he was shot down and killed instantly. The third pilot, a fellow by the name of Walter Manning from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, his plane was disabled and he had to bail out. And he bailed out over a town. It was Linz, Austria. And when he landed, a mob of the local citizenry picked him up and took him to the local jailhouse and put him in jail. But 2 nights later, that same mob broke into the jail and took Walter out, beat him up pretty badly, and then lynched him from a lamppost.
Oh, my God.
So these things did happen during the war.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I mentioned it wasn't just unique as far as the African-American pilots were concerned.
Right.
This happened to a lot of the white pilots that went down, especially the bomber crews.
Yes.
And anyway, incidentally to that, just a little over a year ago in April 1st, the government of Austria invited me back over because they made a memorial to Walter, and they were having recanted about the populace murdering Walter at the time there, so they wanted to give a memorial to him and represent it as the Austrian government. So I was invited over to that memorial, which was very, very, very moving.
On top of knowing the responsibility of guarding the bombers, you guys were pioneers, racial pioneers, in a country still in the throes of segregation, of all kinds of bigotry.
Yes.
Were you aware? Did that weigh on you?
My eye was on the prize, and as I tried to mention before, as the prize was my getting my wings, becoming a pilot. This is something before the war I wanted to do, and I wasn't going to let anything get in the way, and certainly not defeat myself and the objective that I had there by caving in to the discrimination that was at hand at the time. So in keeping my eye on the prize, I just steadily went after the wings there. I graduated in June of 1944. I got my second lieutenant's bars, and I got my wings here, and I didn't even know how to drive a car yet.
You flew a plane before you drove a car.
But in New York, I didn't need, the family didn't need a car, with the transportation system that they have there.
When you came back from the war, one of the things that always shocked me about the Tuskegee Airmen is they were not recognized after the war as much as you would have thought. I mean, it's shocking to me that your book is only coming out now, Soaring to Glory. I mean, it's one of the great stories of World War II. Did you feel that when you came back? Did you want a little bit more credit than...
Yeah, I just sort of dismissed it at the time as far as getting credit and the accolades and that type of thing. And, well, I mean, as I said, I think there's something like 1 million men that were under arms, and when you compare yourself to that, I'm sorry, 11 million.
11
when you compare yourself to that 11 million there, you're not even a drop in the bucket there. So I really didn't consider what I had done as being, that great. I did my part. as 11 million other guys did who were in the service there. When I got out of the service there, or when I got back home, it was the same old as far as the social atmosphere was concerned, and the jobs that were not available to African Americans at the time were still not available to African Americans. So, but what I did is I didn't let that stop me from trying to pursue my ambition is to become a airline pilot, and I did apply to a couple of airlines, and I was rejected, and because of my color. But happily to say is that within a few years, the airlines recanted, and they started accepting African Americans as aircrew members and pilots until today, where every major airline you have
Sure.
first pilots and who are flying with the airlines, and also some of the other airlines, or not airlines, but the carriers like UPS and FedEx that are heavily populated by African Americans there. I was, and most gratified just a couple of years ago, and I was taking a flight from Detroit. I forget where I was going, but in entering the plane, I looked in the cockpit there, and the two pilots were in there, and they were both African Americans. And I said, wow, but the thing that really got me is, would you guess that they were both female?
So my last question, because I'm out of time, unfortunately. I could talk to you for a long time,
Sure.
but when you've seen so much change, I mean, you've seen so much become different over your lifetime.
Yes.
When you talk to young people, what is it you want to tell them?
Want to tell them to keep their eye on the prize, and whatever you do is pursue excellence in doing it there, and don't let hate or hurt turn you around from what you want to do there. Dismiss that as just an emotion that you can overcome, and pursue your dreams. And if you do have to turn around that dream because it's evaporating or something like that, find yourself a fallback position and get that fallback position early, just in case what you wanted doesn't come true there, and do like I had done to a fallback position there. I decided to go back to school. I went to New York University, got my degree in mechanical engineering, followed the career path up through private industry then, and actually I retired as vice president of a Fortune 500 oil and gas pipeline company.
Colonel Stewart, you've not only helped defeat one of the greatest enemies of humankind, you made our country a better place. It's an honor. It really is.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Already.
That's Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart. The book is called Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's first-hand account of World War II. It's co-authored by Philip Handelman. You can tell I got, I admit it, I was overawed by the guy. I mean, he just, I have this theory that change comes, I'll say this is a final reflection here, that activists don't do anything. That activists ride the tide of change. Change is made by guys like that, okay? When I was studying all these different aviation heroes, I watched the HBO movie Tuskegee Airmen. There are two movies. One was made by the Lucas people. It's called something like Red Tails. Colonel Stewart himself said that one was it was too much Hollywood, but the HBO one was pretty good, I thought. And John Lithgow is in it as kind of an evil, or racist, I should say, senator trying to stop the airmen from being formed. And I was watching it with my daughter, who was still living at home at the time, and Lithgow makes this racist speech, and she turned to me and she said, is he insane? Is this senator, not Lithgow, obviously, is this senator insane? And I tried to explain to her that when insanity is the narrative, sane people do insane stuff. I talk about this with George Washington holding slaves. I think it's true today of the left with abortion. I think that good people are supporting horrific, abominable things because the narrative surrounds them and they can't think outside it. And once that narrative passed, it's easy for activists to get up and open their big mouths and shout and parade and pretend to be heroes. But meanwhile, a guy like this, he uses the word, "I kept my eyes on the prize." What he means is he did what he wanted to do with this tidal wave of narrative, of racist narrative standing against him, you know. And these guys are giants. They're giants. And it's just to be in the guy's presence, you know, he's old enough, he's literally old enough to be my father. And to be in his presence, a guy who just, with his body, you know, not with his mouth, with his body, walked into that tide of prejudice. You know, what I was saying about my daughters, people today don't know. They don't understand what it was. Even I am too young to really understand the kind of racism that permeated the atmosphere, not just of this country, but really the world. But it was bad in this country and certainly in the South. And just to say that, like, a guy couldn't fly a plane because he was black, and he couldn't fight for his country because he was black, he couldn't then, even after the war, become a commercial pilot because he was black. And this guy just pushed that back with his body, not with his mouth. He just made it change by himself. God bless him for what he did for all of us. I'm sure he will.